Jake's new life among Lyra's people was a whirlwind of discovery. Every day brought something new sights, new knowledge, new challenges. The city in the stars was vast and alive, constantly shifting and evolving. Pathways glowed brighter. As crowds moved through them, buildings seemed to breathe with energy, and the air hummed with the sound of distant conversations in languages Jake was slowly learning to understand. At first, he felt out of place. He was human, after all, and his presence stood out among the graceful, shimmering aliens who called this place home. But they welcomed him warmly, treating him as one of their own. They taught him how to navigate their technology, how to communicate more effectively, and how to adapt to their way of thinking. The bracelet on his wrist helped too. It enhanced his senses, sharpened his reflexes, and even allowed him to understand some of their melodic language without translation. Lyra stayed by his side throughout it all. She acted as both his guide and his friend, patiently explaining things when he didn't understand and laughing softly when he made mistakes. Her laughter was like music, light and soothing, and it reminded Jake that no matter how strange this world was, he wasn't alone. One evening, as they walked along a floating pathway high above the city, Lyra stopped and pointed to the horizon. A massive ship loomed in the distance, its surface covered in intricate patterns that shimmered like water under starlight. It was unlike any vessel Jake had ever seen, larger than anything humans could build, yet elegant and streamlined. "What is that?" Jake asked, his voice filled with awe. "Our journey begins," Lyra replied, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "You chose to stay. Now we go beyond." Jake frowned, confused. "Beyond?" She nodded. "This city is our home, but there are other worlds, other peoples. We explored together." Jake's heart raced at the thought. Exploring the galaxy had always been his dream, and now it was becoming a reality. But leaving the safety of the city felt daunting. What if he wasn't ready? What if he couldn't keep up? As if sensing his hesitation, Lyra placed a hand on his arm. "You are strong," she said firmly, "and you have us. Always." Her words reassured him. He took deep breath and nodded. "Okay, let's go." The next morning, they boarded the massive ship. Inside, the interior was breathtaking wide halls lined with glowing panels, rooms filled with advanced technology, and observation decks that offered stunning views of space. Jake wandered through the ship in wonder, marveling at every detail. He felt like a child again, discovering the universe for the first time. Their destination was a planet called Vera, a world known for its vibrant ecosystems and ancient ruins. Lyra explained that her people often visited such places to study and learn. "Knowledge is power," she said simply. "It connects us to others." When they arrived, Jake stepped onto the surface of Vera and was immediately struck by its beauty. The sky was a deep shade of purple, streaked with golden clouds. Plants grew in spirals, their leaves glowing faintly. Strange creatures flitted through the air, their wings shimmering like rainbows. It was unlike anything Jake had ever seen. They spent days exploring the planet, uncovering hidden temples buried beneath layers of vegetation. The ruins were covered in symbols and carvings that told stories of an ancient civilization. Jake worked alongside Lyra and her people, helping to decipher the markings and document their findings. It was hard work, but also deeply rewarding. Each discovery felt like a piece of a puzzle coming together, revealing glimpses of a long loss. Culture. During their exploration, Jake noticed subtle changes in himself. His body felt stronger, faster, thanks to the bracelet. His mind seemed sharper too, able to process information quickly and efficiently. But more than that, he felt a growing sense of belonging. He wasn't just observing this world. He was part of it, contributing ways he never thought possible. One night, as they camped near the ruins, Lyra sat beside him, gazing up at the stars. "Do you miss your world?" she asked quietly. Jake thought about it for a moment. Earth felt far away now, almost like a memory. He missed certain things: the smell of fresh rain, the taste of homemade food, the sound of laughter shared with old friends. But those feelings weren't enough to make him regret his decision. Sometimes, he admitted. But I don't belong there anymore. Not really. Lyra smiled, her expression soft. You belong here. With me. Her words warmed his heart. He realized that his connection with Lyra wasn't just about gratitude or trust. It was deeper than that. Somewhere along the way, they had formed a bond that transcended words and species. They were partners, united by shared experiences and mutual respect. Their journey continued across countless worlds, each one offering new wonders and challenges. Jake learned to adapt, to embrace the unknown, and to find joy in the little things, a sunrise painted in alien hues, the sound of wind rustling through crystalline trees, the warmth of Lyra's hand in his dot. As time passed, Jake began to notice another change within himself. The bracelet wasn't just enhancing his physical abilities, it was transforming him in ways he couldn't fully explain. His skin occasionally shimmered faintly, like Lyra's. His thoughts became clearer, his emotions more attuned to those around him. He was becoming something more than human, something greater. One day, while standing on the deck of the ship as it drifted through space, Jake turned to Lyra. What happens to me? He asked. Will I become like you? Lyra nodded, her expression calm. If you wish, the gift is yours to accept. Jake looked down at the bracelet, feeling its steady pulse against his wrist. He thought about everything he had gained since meeting Lyra, the strength, the knowledge, the sense of purpose. He realized that this transformation wasn't something to fear. It was a reward, a gift for choosing to step into the unknown and embrace a new path. I accept, he said firmly, meeting her gaze. Lyra smiled, her eyes shining with pride. Then you will never be alone. Together we see the stars. From that moment on, Jake's transformation accelerated. His body adapted further, his senses expanded, and his connection to Lyra and her people deepened. He no longer felt like an outsider. He was one of them, a traveler among the stars. Years passed, and their adventures continued. They explored uncharted planets, forged alliances with alien races, and uncovered secrets that reshaped their understanding of the universe. Through it all, Jake remained grateful for the choices he had made, for saving Lyra, for trusting her, and for embracing the extraordinary life she had offered him. In the end, Jake realized that his reward wasn't just immortality or enhanced abilities. It was the chance to live a life full of meaning, to discover the limitless possibilities of the cosmos, and to do so alongside someone who had become his closest companion. Together they soared through the stars, leaving behind a legacy of courage, curiosity, and connection, a testament to what could be achieved when two souls from different worlds found each other in the vastness of space. The alien ship moved smoothly through space, its engines humming softly as it traveled at speeds Jake couldn't comprehend. Inside, the atmosphere was calm and serene, a stark contrast to the chaos they had left behind on Zeta 7. Jake sat quietly in the central chamber, still trying to process everything that had happened. The bracelet on his wrist felt warm against his skin, pulsing faintly with energy. He flexed his fingers, marveling at how different his body felt, stronger, lighter, more alive. Lyra stayed close to him, her presence reassuring. She seemed more relaxed now, surrounded by her people. They spoke to her in their melodic language, asking questions and offering explanations. Lyra responded patiently, often glancing at Jake as she spoke. It was clear she was advocating for him, explaining why he deserved to be there. Jake didn't understand most of what was said, but he trusted her completely. One of the aliens approached. Jake gestured for him to follow. Lyra nodded encouragingly, so Jake stood up and walked with the figure down a narrow corridor. The walls shimmered like liquid metal, reflecting soft light that changed colors subtly as they moved. They entered a small room filled with glowing panels and strange instruments. The alien pointed to one of the panels and touched it lightly. A holographic image appeared, showing a map of stars and planets. Jake stared at the display, amazed. "Is this where we're going?" he asked, even though he knew the alien wouldn't understand. The figure nodded and began pointing to specific locations on the map, making gestures that suggested movement and direction. Jake tried to keep up, nodding whenever he thought he understood. When the explanation was over, the alien turned to leave, motioning for Jake to return to the central chamber. Back in the main area, Lyra greeted him with a smile. "Home," she said, pointing to the map that now floated above the pedestal holding the crystal. "Soon," Jake nodded, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. He had dreamed of exploring the stars his entire life, but nothing could have prepared him for this. Traveling with Lyra's people was beyond anything he'd ever imagined. Yet, despite the wonder of it all, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. His old life, his world, it felt distant, almost forgotten. Was he ready to leave it all behind? As the hours passed, Jake observed the aliens carefully. They were peaceful and efficient, working together seamlessly to operate the ship. There was no shouting, no arguing, just quiet cooperation. It made him reflect on humanity, on the conflicts and divisions that plagued Earth. If only humans could work together like this, he thought, maybe they could achieve greatness too. Lyra noticed his contemplative expression and sat beside him. She placed a hand on his arm, her touch gentle and comforting. "You think much," she said. Her voice soft. Jake chuckled. "I guess I do. It's just, everything is so new, so different. I'm trying to understand." Lyra nodded, her eyes filled with understanding. "Time," she said simply. "You will learn." Her words reassured him. He realized he didn't need to have all the answers right away. This journey was about discovery not just of new worlds, but of himself. Later, the ship slowed as it approached a massive structure floating in space. It looked like a city suspended among the stars, its towers glowing faintly and its surfaces covered in intricate patterns. Jake's breath caught in his throat as he gazed at it. "Is this your home?" he asked Lyra. She nodded, her expression lighting up with pride. "Yes, home." The ship docked smoothly, and the ramp extended once again. As they stepped outside, Jake was overwhelmed by the sight before him. The city was breathtaking alive with light and movement. Aliens of various shapes and sizes walked along pathways that seemed to float in midair. Buildings twisted and curved in ways that defied logic, yet somehow felt natural. In the distance, a large dome pulsed with energy, casting a soft glow over everything. Lyra led Jake through the bustling streets, introducing him to her people. Some greeted him warmly, while others watched him curiously, despite the differences. In appearance, Jake felt a surprising sense of connection. These beings weren't so different from humans. They laughed, they worked, they lived. And in their eyes, he saw kindness and curiosity. They eventually arrived at a grand hall where a group of elders waited. They wore flowing robes that shimmered like starlight, and their expressions were wise and solemn. One of them stepped forward, addressing Lyra in their language. She responded respectfully, then turned to Jake. "They wish to speak with you," she explained. Jake swallowed nervously. "What do they want?" "To thank you," Lyra said, "and to offer choice." The elder gestured for Jake to step closer. Though he felt out of place, Jake obeyed, standing before the group. The lead elder spoke slowly, using simple words that Jake could understand. "You save our daughter," the elder said, nodding toward Lyra. "For this, we give gratitude. But also, we see courage in you. Humanity has potential. You show us this." Jake blinked, surprised by the compliment. "I just did what anyone would do," he said humbly. The elder smiled faintly. "No, not all would do as you did. Your actions prove worth. Now we offer choice. Return to your world or stay with us. Learn, explore, decide." Jake's heart raced. He hadn't expected this. The idea of returning to Earth was tempting. He missed the familiarity of his old life. But staying here, exploring the galaxy with Lyra and her people, was an opportunity he could never pass up. He glanced at Lyra, who watched him with hopeful eyes. Then he turned back to the elders. "I choose to stay," he said firmly. "If you'll have me." The elders exchanged glances, then nodded approvingly. The lead elder placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. "Welcome," he said. "You are family now." Relief and joy washed over Jake. He looked at Lyra, who smiled brightly. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice filled with gratitude. From that moment on, Jake became part of their community. He learned their customs, their language, and their way of life. The bracelet on his wrist continued to enhance his abilities, allowing him to adapt quickly. He explored the city, discovering wonders beyond his wildest dreams. And through it all, Lyra remained by his side, guiding him and sharing in his excitement. But Jake knew this was only the beginning. There were countless worlds to discover, mysteries to unravel, and challenges to face. With Lyra and her people by his side, he was ready for whatever lay ahead. For the first time in his life, Jake felt truly alive, and he knew he had found his place in the universe. Jake and Lyra rested for a short while on the plateau, catching their breath after the harrowing escape. The predators had stopped chasing them, at least for now, but Jake knew they couldn't afford to let their guard down. He glanced at Lyra, who sat quietly beside him, her hands still trembling slightly from using her powers. She looked exhausted, yet there was a quiet strength in her posture that reminded him of her resilience. "Are you okay?" Jake asked, his voice soft. Lyra nodded, though her expression remained serious. She held the crystal tightly, its faint glow illuminating her face. Jake noticed how protective she was of it, as if it were the only thing keeping her grounded. He wanted to ask more about it, but he didn't want to push her. Instead, he focused on their next steps. "We need to keep moving," Jake said after a moment. "This place isn't safe," Lyra agreed with a small nod. She stood up slowly, brushing dirt off her tattered clothes. Then, pointing toward the horizon, she gestured for Jake to follow her. The landscape ahead was rugged and barren, with jagged cliffs and deep ravines stretching as far as the eye could see. It wasn't an easy path, but Jake trusted Lyra's instincts. If anyone knew how to navigate this alien world, it was her dot as they walked. Jake found himself reflecting on everything that had happened since he'd saved Lyra in the forest. What started as a simple mission to investigate an energy reading had turned into something far greater. He had risked his life multiple times, not just for her, but also for the mysterious crystal she carried. And though he still didn't fully understand its significance, he knew it was important. Important enough to fight for. The journey was grueling. The sun beat down mercilessly, baking the rocky terrain. There was little shade, and the water they carried was running low. Jake rationed it carefully, making sure Lyra drank enough to stay hydrated. Despite the harsh conditions, she pressed on without complaint, her determination unwavering. Her presence gave Jake strength. Even when his body felt ready to give out by late afternoon, they reached a narrow canyon. The walls rose high on either side, casting long shadows across the ground. Lyra paused at the entrance, studying the path ahead. Jake joined her, scanning the area for signs of danger. The silence was eerie, broken only by the sound of the wind whistling through the rocks. "This looks like a good place to hide," Jake said. "If we're careful, we might be able to lose the predators here." Lyra nodded, but her expression remained cautious. She pointed to the crystal, then to the sky above. Jake frowned, unsure what she meant. Was she saying they needed to use it somehow, or was she warning him about something? Before he could ask, a distant rumble echoed through the canyon. Both of them froze, listening intently. The sound grew louder, accompanied by vibrations that shook the ground beneath their feet. Jake grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her back, just as a massive rock slide cascaded down the cliffside, blocking the entrance behind them. They were trapped. For a moment, panic set in. Jake looked around, searching for another way out. The canyon walls were too steep to climb, and the debris from the rock slide was too heavy to move. They were stuck with no clear escape route. Lyra placed a calming hand on his shoulder, drawing his attention back to her. She pointed to the crystal again, this time holding it up so the light caught it. Its glow intensified, pulsing rhythmically. "What are you doing?" Jake asked, watching her closely. Lyra didn't answer. Instead, she closed her eyes and focused on the crystal, her breathing slow and steady. Jake felt a strange energy in the air, almost like static electricity. The hairs on his arms stood on end as the crystal began to hum softly. Then, without warning, a beam of light shot upward, piercing the sky. Jake shielded his eyes, stunned by the sudden brilliance. The light seemed to stretch infinitely, reaching beyond the atmosphere of Zeta 7. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, a low hum filled the air, growing louder until it became almost deafening. Jake turned to Lyra, his heart pounding. "What did you do?" He shouted over the noise. She opened her eyes and smiled faintly, pointing to the sky. Jake followed her gaze and saw something incredible, a ship descending from orbit. It was sleek and elegant, glowing faintly as it hovered above the canyon. Its design was unmistakably alien, far more advanced than anything humanity had ever created. Slowly, it lowered itself closer, extending a ramp toward them. Jake stared in disbelief. "Is that your people?" Lyra nodded, her expression filled with relief. She took his hand and led him toward the ship, her grip firm but gentle. As they approached, the ramp unfolded completely, revealing a group of figures standing inside. They looked similar to Lyra, tall and slender, with shimmering skin and luminous eyes. One of them stepped forward, addressing Lyra in her melodic language. She responded quickly, gesturing toward Jake and holding up the crystal. The figure studied Jake for a moment, then nodded approvingly. Lyra turned to Jake, her expression soft but serious. "Safe," she said, speaking in English again. "You are safe." Jake felt a surge of gratitude and sadness. He had done everything he could to protect her, and now her people had come to take her home. But what about him? Would they leave him behind? Or would they allow him to join them? The figure motioned for both of them to board the ship. Jake hesitated, unsure of what to do. Lyra squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Come," she urged, her voice gentle but firm. Taking a deep breath, Jake followed her onto the ramp. As they entered the ship, he marveled at the interior. The walls shimmered like liquid metal, and the air smelled faintly sweet, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. The other aliens watched him curiously, but didn't speak. Lyra led him to a central chamber, where the crystal was placed on a pedestal. It began to glow brighter, filling the room with warm light. One of the aliens approached Jake, holding out a device that looked like a bracelet. When Jake hesitated, Lyra explained, "Gift. For you." Jake accepted the device, slipping it onto his wrist. Immediately, he felt a surge of energy course through his body. His senses sharpened, and his fatigue vanished. He looked at Lyra, amazed. "What is this?" She smiled, touching the bracelet lightly. "Strength, protection, always." Jake didn't fully understand, but he didn't need to. He could feel the power radiating from the bracelet, a gift unlike anything he'd ever imagined. Lyra's people were thanking him for saving her, for risking his life, for proving that humans were capable of compassion and bravery. As the ship lifted off, Jake gazed out a window at the shrinking planet below. Zeta 7 was beautiful in its own strange way, but he didn't regret leaving it behind. Not when he had the chance to explore the stars alongside Lyra. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. And as the ship soared into the vastness of space, Jake realized that his life had changed forever. He wasn't just an astronaut anymore. He was part of something bigger, something extraordinary. Jake and Lyra kept moving, putting as much distance as they could between themselves and the wreckage of her ship. The Predator's roars faded into the distance, but Jake knew they wouldn't give up easily. Those creatures were relentless, driven by hunger or some deeper instinct to hunt beings like Lyra. He glanced at her from time to time, still trying to process what he'd seen back at the clearing. The way she had used her glowing hands to unleash that burst of energy was unlike anything he'd ever witnessed. It left him with more questions than answers. Lyra didn't seem eager to talk about it. She walked silently, her focus fixed on the path ahead. The crystal she carried pulsed faintly in her hand, casting a soft glow that illuminated their surroundings. Jake wondered what it truly was. Was it a weapon? A tool? Or something else entirely? Whatever its purpose, it clearly meant a great deal to her. She held it close, protectively, as if it were the most valuable thing in the universe. As they climbed higher into the hills, the forest began to thin out. The air grew colder, and the ground became rocky and uneven. Jake's legs ached, and his lungs burned from the exertion, but he pushed through the discomfort. He couldn't afford to slow down, not with those predators still out there. Every sound made him flinch, every shadow seemed to move. His nerves were stretched thin, but he forced himself to stay alert. Lyra, on the other hand, appeared unfazed by the harsh conditions. Her steps were steady, her breathing calm. She navigated the terrain with ease, as if she had lived in this wilderness her entire life. Occasionally, she would glance back at Jake, checking to see if he was keeping up. When she noticed how tired he looked, she stopped and gestured for him to rest. "We can't stop yet," Jake said, shaking his head. "Not until we're sure we've lost them." Lyra tilted her head, studying him. Then, without warning, she placed a hand on his chest. The touch was gentle, almost comforting. Jake felt a strange warmth spread through his body, easing the ache in his muscles. He blinked in surprise, looking at her. "What did you just do?" She didn't answer, but her expression softened. It was as if she was telling him without words that he could trust her. Jake wanted to ask more questions, but he realized it wouldn't matter. Some things couldn't be explained, not with the limited understanding they shared. Instead, he nodded and took a deep breath, feeling slightly rejuvenated. "Okay," he said quietly. "Let's keep going." The hours passed slowly. The landscape changed as they ascended, becoming barren and desolate. The trees disappeared, replaced by jagged cliffs and wind-swept plains. The sky above was darkening, signaling the approach of another night. Jake knew they needed shelter soon, but finding a safe place in this barren wasteland wouldn't be easy. Just as the first stars began to appear, Lyra pointed toward a cluster of rocks in the distance. They formed a natural cave, partially hidden by boulders. Jake nodded in agreement, and they hurried toward it. Inside, the space was small but sufficient. It offered protection from the wind and enough room for both of them to sit comfortably. Jake set down his pack and began unpacking supplies, while Lyra examined the area, ensuring it was secure. Once they settled in, Jake leaned against the wall of the cave, his eyes heavy with exhaustion. He watched as Lyra sat cross-legged on the ground, cradling the crystal in her lap. Its glow lit up her face, making her look even more ethereal. For a moment, Jake allowed himself to marvel at her. She was so different from anyone or anything ever known. Yet, despite their differences, he felt a connection to her that went beyond words. He trusted her completely, even though he barely understood her. "Lyra," he said softly, breaking the silence. She turned to look at him, her luminous eyes meeting his. "Why are you helping me? You don't owe me anything. I'm just a stranger." She hesitated, then reached out and touched his arm again. This time, the gesture felt deliberate, meaningful. She pointed to herself, then to him, and repeated the word she had used earlier, home. Jake frowned, trying to make sense of what she meant. "You think I'm your home?" he asked, confused. Lyra shook her head and smiled faintly. She pointed to the crystal, then to the stars outside. Then she placed a hand over her heart and gestured between them. Jake thought about it for a moment, piecing together her meaning. "You're saying we're connected because of this?" "Because of what happened," she nodded, her smile widening. Jake didn't fully understand, but he didn't need to. What mattered was that she trusted him, and he trusted her. That bond was enough. They rested for a few hours, taking turns keeping watch. When morning came, they prepared to leave the cave and continue their journey. But as they stepped outside, they were met with an unwelcome sight. Tracks fresh ones marked. The ground leading toward the cave. The predators had found them. Jake cursed under his breath, gripping his plasma rifle tightly. "We need to move. Now." Lyra nodded, clutching the crystal to her chest. They moved quickly, following a narrow ridge that wound along the edge of a steep cliff. The path was treacherous, with loose rocks threatening to send them tumbling into the abyss below. Jake stayed close to Lyra, ready to grab her if she slipped. He couldn't let anything happen to her, not after everything they'd been through. But the predators were faster than they anticipated. Within minutes, the growls echoed behind them, growing louder. Jake glanced over his shoulder and saw two of the beasts closing in, their red eyes gleaming with malice. He fired a shot, hitting one of them in the leg. It stumbled, but didn't fall, snarling in rage. "Keep going," Jake shouted, urging Lyra forward. She obeyed, her movements quick and precise. But as they rounded a bend in the path, disaster struck. A section of the ridge gave way beneath Jake's feet, sending him sliding toward the edge. He grabbed onto a rock protruding from the cliffside, his heart racing as he dangled precariously above the drop. Lyra stopped immediately and rushed to his side. She dropped to her knees, reaching for him. Jake shook his head, knowing she couldn't pull him up alone. "Go!" he yelled. "Save yourself!" But Lyra ignored him. She extended her glowing hands, and a wave of energy surged from her palms, wrapping around Jake like an invisible force. Slowly, carefully, she lifted him back onto solid ground. The effort left her visibly drained, but she didn't stop to rest. As soon as Jake was safe, she pulled him to his feet and urged him to keep running. They finally reached a plateau, where the path widened and the predators hesitated to follow. Exhausted and shaken, Jake collapsed onto the ground, gasping for air. Lyra knelt beside him, her hands trembling from the strain of using her powers. Despite her fatigue, she managed a small smile. "You saved me again," Jake said, his voice filled with awe. "I don't know how you do it, but thank you." Lyra placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. Then, for the first time since they'd met, she spoke in a language Jake could understand. "Together," she whispered, her voice soft but clear. Jake stared at her, stunned. "Together," he repeated, nodding. Jake and Lyra left the outpost under the cover of darkness. The air outside was cold, and the forest loomed ahead like a shadowy maze. Jake carried a backpack filled with supplies, food, water, medical kits, and tools. Lyra walked beside him, her movements light and careful, as if she knew the dangers lurking in the trees. She pointed occasionally, guiding him through the dense foliage. Though they couldn't speak each other's language, their bond had grown, strong enough that words weren't always necessary. The journey wasn't easy. The ground was uneven, covered with roots and rocks that made every step a challenge. The glowing blue leaves overhead cast just enough light to see by, but the deeper they went, the darker it became. Jake could hear strange noises around them, rustling in the bush, distant growls, and the occasional snap of branches. Each sound put him on edge, reminding him of the predators that roamed the forest. Lyra seemed to sense his tension. She reached out and touched his arm, her fingers cool against his skin. When he looked at her, she gave him a small, reassuring nod. It wasn't much, but it helped calm his nerves. Jake realized that Lyra wasn't just relying on him for protection. She was trying to protect him too. Her presence gave him strength, even though he didn't fully understand why. As they traveled, Lyra began using gestures and simple drawings in the dirt to share more about her people. She sketched symbols that looked like stars and planets, explaining that her kind were explorers who traveled across the galaxy. They sought knowledge, not conquest. Their ship had been damaged during a storm while passing near Zeta 7, forcing them to crash land. Most of her crew had died in the impact, and those who survived were hunted by the predators. Jake listened intently, piecing together what he could from her explanations. He wished he could ask questions, but their limited communication made it difficult. Still, he felt a growing respect for Lyra and her people. They were survivors, determined to endure no matter the odds. And now, somehow, their fate was tied to his. After hours of walking, they stopped to rest near a stream. The water was clear and cold, reflecting the faint glow of the forest canopy above. Jake knelt to fill his canteen, while Lyra cupped her hands and drank directly from the stream. She seemed completely at ease, as if the wilderness was a part of her. Jake envied her comfort. To him, this place was alien and dangerous, but to her, it felt almost familiar. While they rested, Lyra picked up a stick and began drawing again. This time, she sketched something new, a symbol that looked like a spiral surrounded by tiny dots. She pointed to it and then to herself, repeating a word in her melodic language. Jake frowned, trying to understand. "Is that your name?" he asked, pointing to the symbol and then to her. Lyra shook her head and smiled. She tapped the symbol, then placed a hand over her chest. "Home," she said slowly, her voice soft but clear. Jake's eyes widened. "Home? That's your home?" She nodded, her expression lighting up. For the first time since they'd met, Lyra seemed truly happy. Jake studied the symbol carefully, committing it to memory. He didn't know what it meant or where it came from, but he understood its importance. It represented everything Lyra had lost and everything she hoped to find again. They continued their journey after resting, moving deeper into the forest. The terrain grew rougher, with steep inclines and thick vines blocking their path. Jake used a machete to cut through the obstacles, sweat dripping down his face despite the cool night air. Lyra stayed close, helping whenever she could. She pointed out safe paths and warned him of hidden dangers. Her instincts sharp and precise. By dawn, they reached the edge of a clearing. In the center stood the wreckage of Lyra's ship. It was half buried in the ground, its metallic surface scorched and twisted. Pieces of debris were scattered around it, glinting faintly in the early morning light. Jake stared at the scene in awe. The ship was unlike anything he'd ever seen, sleek and organic, as if it had been grown rather than built. Lyra stepped forward, her steps quickening as she approached the wreckage. She ran her hands over the hull, murmuring softly in her language. Jake followed, keeping an eye out for predators. The area felt eerily quiet, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. Inside the ship, Lyra moved with purpose. She led Jake to a compartment hidden beneath the floor, revealing a glowing crystal the size of his fist. The object pulsed with energy, casting a soft light that filled the room. Lyra held it gently, her expression reverent. She turned to Jake and pointed to the crystal, then to the stars outside. "Key," she said, her voice firm. Jake didn't need to ask what she meant. The crystal was important. It might even be the key to repairing her ship or contacting her people. But before he could respond, a low growl echoed through the clearing. Both of them froze, turning toward the sound. From the shadows emerged the predators, 3 of them, larger and more menacing than the ones Jake had faced before. Their eyes glowed red, and their jagged teeth gleamed in the dim light. They circled the ship, snapping their jaws hungrily. Jake grabbed his plasma rifle, stepping in front of Lyra to shield her. "Stay behind me," he whispered, even though he knew she couldn't understand. The largest predator lunged at them, and Jake fired, hitting it squarely in the chest. The creature let out a deafening roar, collapsing to the ground, but the others didn't retreat. Instead, they attacked together, forcing Jake to dodge and fire repeatedly. He managed to wound one, but the third beast leapt at him, knocking the rifle from his hands. Jake stumbled backward, his heart pounding. The predator towered over him, its claws raised to strike. Just as it lunged, Lyra stepped in front of him. Her arms glowed brightly, and she thrust her hands forward, releasing a burst of energy that sent the creature flying. It crashed into a tree, unconscious. Jake stared at her in shock. "What?" How did you do that? Lyra didn't answer. She grabbed the crystal and motioned for Jake to follow her. Together, they fled the clearing, leaving the predators behind. As they ran, Jake couldn't stop thinking about what he'd just witnessed. Lyra had powers abilities he couldn't explain. She hadn't mentioned them before, hadn't hinted at them in any way. What else was she hiding? When they finally stopped to catch their breath, Jake turned to her. "You saved my life," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Thank you." Lyra looked at him, her expression unreadable. Then slowly she smiled. It was a small gesture, but it meant everything. Whatever secret she carried. Whatever. Challenges lay ahead. Jake knew one thing for certain. He would stand by her side, no matter what. Jake spent the next few hours tending to the alien female. He wasn't a doctor, but he knew enough to keep her stable. Her wounds were deep, and her strange, shimmering blood made him uneasy. It didn't look like human blood at all. It sparkled. Faintly, almost like liquid metal. Every time he touched her skin, it felt cool, smoother than anything he'd ever encountered. Despite her injuries, there was something otherworldly about her, something that made Jake both curious and cautious. He set up a makeshift bed for her in one corner of the outpost, covering her with a thermal blanket to keep her warm. The outpost wasn't designed for guests, especially not ones from another world, so Jake had to improvise. He kept checking her vitals, using the limited equipment he had. Her breathing was steady now, though still shallow. Occasionally, she would stir, letting out soft sounds that Jake couldn't understand. They weren't words, but they carried emotion, pain, fear, maybe even hope. As the hours passed, Jake found himself staring at her more often than he cared to admit. She looked fragile, yet there was an undeniable strength in her features. Her face was delicate, with high cheekbones and a pointed chin. Her closed eyes were long and almond-shaped, hinting at the beauty they might hold if she ever opened them. Jake wondered what kind of world she came from, what kind of life she lived before ending up here on Zeta 7. Was she alone? Were there others like her somewhere on this planet? The thought of others made Jake uneasy. If those predators were hunting her, they might be hunting others too. And if she woke up, would she tell him? Would she even trust him? These questions weighed heavily on his mind as he paced back and forth across the small living quarters of the outpost. By the time night fell over Zeta 7, Jake's comms panel began lighting up with messages. His superiors had noticed his unscheduled trip to the planet's surface and wanted answers. "Outpost Delta 12, please respond," the automated voice repeated over and over. Jake ignored it. He couldn't deal with them right now. Not while she was still unconscious. Not while her fate and possibly his own hung in the balance. Finally, just as Jake was beginning to lose hope, the alien woman stirred again. This time, her eyes fluttered open. Jake froze, unsure of what to do. Her gaze locked onto him, wide and unblinking. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then, slowly, she sat up, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Her movements were graceful, deliberate, as if every action required careful thought. "Are you okay?" Jake asked softly, though he doubted she understood him. She tilted, her head studying him with an intensity that made Jake feel exposed. After a pause, she reached out and touched his arm. Her fingers were light, almost hesitant, but the contact sent a shiver through him. It wasn't unpleasant, just unexpected. She seemed to be trying to communicate without words, searching for some way to bridge the gap between them. Jake grabbed a pen and a piece of paper. "Can you write?" he asked, showing her the items. She stared at them blankly, then shook her head. Frustration flickered across her face, but she didn't give up. Instead, she pointed to herself and said something in a melodic, unfamiliar language. The sound was beautiful, but completely unintelligible. Jake tried mimicking her gesture, pointing to himself and saying, "Jake." To his surprise, she repeated the name, her pronunciation surprisingly clear. Encouraged, Jake pointed to her, raising his eyebrows in question. She hesitated, then placed a hand over her chest and said, "Lyra." "Lyra," Jake echoed, smiling. "That's your name?" She nodded, her expression softening. For the first time since he'd found her, she seemed to relax. Jake felt a spark of connection, however small. They couldn't speak each other's languages, but they were finding ways to communicate. It was progress. Over the next few days, Jake and Lyra worked to build a rudimentary form of understanding. They used gestures, drawings, and trial and error to share information. Jake learned that Lyra's people were explorers, travelers who had crash-landed on Zeta 7 after their ship malfunctioned. She showed him sketches of her vessel, half buried in the forest where he'd found her. The predators, she explained through pantomime, were drawn to the energy emitted by her technology. They hunted her kind relentlessly. Lyra also hinted at something else, something important. Through fragmented gestures and symbols, she conveyed that her people possessed knowledge far beyond anything humans had discovered. Advanced technology, unimaginable power. But Jake couldn't grasp the full meaning of what she was trying to say. Her expressions grew frustrated, and she eventually gave up, leaving Jake to wonder what secret she was hiding, despite the language. Barrier, a bond began to form between them. Jake admired Lyra's resilience, her quiet determination to survive against all odds. And Lyra, in turn, seemed to trust Jake more with each passing day. She watched him closely, observing the way he moved, the way he spoke. Sometimes she would mimic his actions, laughing softly when she got it right. Other times, she would sit silently, gazing out the window at the endless expanse of stars. But not everything was peaceful. Jake's superiors grew increasingly impatient. Their messages became more urgent, demanding updates on his status. One day, they even threatened disciplinary action if he didn't comply. Jake deleted the messages without responding. He knew he was risking his career, maybe even his freedom. But he couldn't abandon Lyra, not now. Not when she needed him most. Thought the tension outside the outpost mirrored the tension within. The predators hadn't given up. Every night, Jake heard their growls echoing in the distance, a reminder that danger was never far away. He reinforced the outpost's defenses, setting up traps and alarms to ward off any intruders. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were running out of time. One evening, as Jake prepared dinner, a simple meal of rehydrated vegetables and protein paste, Lyra approached him. She placed a hand on his shoulder and gestured toward the window. Outside, the sky was dark, dotted with countless stars. Jake followed her gaze, unsure what she wanted him to see. Then she pointed to the stars and traced a line across the horizon with her finger. Jake realized she was showing him a path or route to her crashed ship. She wanted to go back to retrieve something important. But the journey wouldn't be easy. The predators were sure to follow, and the terrain was treacherous. Jake hesitated, weighing the risks. Could they make it? Should they try? In the end, there was no real choice. Lyra's determination was unwavering, and Jake couldn't deny her. Whatever she needed from that ship, it was worth the risk. Together, they packed supplies and planned their route. As they prepared to leave the safety of the outpost, Jake felt a mix of fear and excitement. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. His life would never be the same. Jake Collins was not the kind of man who enjoyed sitting around. He liked action, movement, and purpose. That's why he became an astronaut in the first place, to explore places no one else had seen. But lately, his days felt more like waiting than exploring. His current assignment wasn't exactly thrilling. He was stationed on a small research outpost orbiting a distant planet called Zeta 7, a world that looked gray and lifeless from space. The outpost was quiet, lonely, and far away from Earth. The job itself was simple enough. Every day, Jake would scan the surface of Zeta 7 for signs of anything unusual: minerals, energy signals, or even traces of water. It was all part of a larger mission to determine if the planet could support human life someday. Most of the time, the scans came back empty. Zeta-7 seemed as dead as it looked. Still, Jake followed orders and kept scanning. One morning, as Jake sat in front of the monitors inside the outpost, something caught his eye. A faint blip appeared on the screen, a strange energy reading coming from a dense forest near the equator. At first, he thought it might be a glitch in the system. But when he ran the scan again, the signal was still there. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but undeniable. Jake leaned back in his chair and scratched his head. This wasn't normal. Energy readings didn't just show up out of nowhere on a planet like this. He knew the rules. Any unusual activity had to be reported immediately. But something inside him hesitated. If he told his superiors about this, they'd send a team to investigate. And by the time they arrived, whatever caused the signal might be gone. Jake wasn't sure why, but he felt drawn to the idea of checking it out himself. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe it was the thrill of doing something bold, something unexpected. Whatever the reason, he made up his mind quickly. He grabbed his gear, climbed into his small exploration pod, and set a course for the planet's surface. The descent was rough. The atmosphere of Zeta-7 was thick with clouds, making visibility poor. As Jake broke through the haze, he saw the forest below, a sprawling expanse of twisted trees with black bark and glowing blue leaves. The colors were strange, almost otherworldly. For a moment, Jake forgot about the energy reading and simply stared at the alien beauty beneath him. He landed the pod near the source of the signal and stepped outside. The air was cool and smelled faintly metallic. Jake adjusted the settings on his scanner and began walking toward the heart of the forest. Each step crunched underfoot, disturbing the silence. The deeper he went, the darker it became. The glowing leaves overhead cast eerie shadows on the ground. Suddenly, he heard a sound, a low growl that sent chills down his spine. Jake froze, gripping the scanner tightly. His training kicked in, and he scanned the area carefully. That's when he saw her. Through the trees, lying motionless on the ground, was an alien female. She didn't look like anything Jake had ever imagined. Her skin shimmered faintly, like moonlight reflecting off water. Her limbs were long and slender, and her eyes, though closed, seemed impossibly large. She wore a tattered garment that clung to her body, torn and dirty. Around her, the bush rustled violently as creatures emerged from the shadows. They were predators, ugly and menacing, with sharp teeth and multiple legs. They circled the alien female, snapping their jaws hungrily. Jake didn't have time to think. Without hesitation, he pulled out his plasma rifle, a standard-issue weapon meant for self-defense, and fired a warning shot into the air. The creatures turned their attention to him, snarling angrily. "Hey, over here!" Jake shouted, waving his arms. The beasts lunged toward him, forcing him to fire again. One of them fell with a screech, but the others kept coming. Jake backed away slowly, trying to keep them distracted. He couldn't let them reach the injured alien. For several tense minutes, Jake fought off the creatures, dodging their attacks and firing whenever he got a clear shot. Finally, the last beast retreated into the forest, leaving behind only silence. Jake took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. Then he turned his attention to the alien female. She was still unconscious, her breathing shallow. Jake knelt beside her and checked for injuries. There were cuts on her arms and legs, and her clothing was soaked with blood. He didn't know how badly hurt she was, but he couldn't leave her there. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms and carried her back to the pod. As he laid her down on the passenger seat, Jake couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why was she being hunted? All these questions swirled in his mind, but there was no time to dwell on them. He needed to get her to safety. The trip back to the outpost was nerve-wracking. Jake kept glancing over at the alien female, worried she wouldn't make it. Her condition didn't improve, but at least she was still breathing. When he finally docked the pod and brought her inside, he wasted no time getting to work. Using the limited medical supplies available, He cleaned her wounds and bandaged them as best he could. Exhausted but determined, Jake sat beside her, watching over her as she slept. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. His life had changed forever. Whatever secrets this alien woman held, Jake was ready to uncover them, even if it meant breaking every rule in the book.